I was at the table and we were talking about business deals and making more money. I was like, look, I've been building brands for the last 5-6 years. I think there's very few people who can do it better, who understand it the way that I understand it. $2.5 million is a small price to pay. Like, a lot of people focus on the how. Like, how am I going to make millions of dollars? The how is actually not that difficult. There's never been that type of return that quickly in the history of entrepreneurs and raising money ever.
Welcome to Growth Society, where we're uncovering the best practices for growth in business, our personal lives, and navigating the ever-changing landscape of uncertainty, specifically with people who are paving their own lanes. Join us on our journey as we dive deep into insightful strategies, time-tested advice, and stories that put you in a position to flourish in every aspect of life. Enjoy the show. Thank you so much. I've got Luca Netz with me here today. By the way, is Luca Netz your real name?
That's not my real name, no.
Okay. Well, the first thing that stood out as we got to know each other and explore a little bit about it is that, first of all, I love the hustle mentality. I almost feel like you grew up in the same borough that I did.
Yep.
You have accomplished a shit ton of things. Well, we'll get you into, but most importantly, you've gone into the consumer product space. You are at one point were like a young Don King for influencers and helped them make money. You ventured off into the NFT space. You ventured off into, I can keep going, but basically every single time you walked into a room, you brought value, and you took your cut, and you took that cut and just kept scaling it.
Yeah.
Welcome to the podcast, man.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, man. So I want to just dive into so much that I feel like I'm going to have to break it into sections. But first things first, I'm going to kind of put you on the hot seat for a little bit. You moved to Miami.
Yep.
You're from LA.
Yep.
Why Miami?
Strictly for kind of tax purposes. I lived here in the past before.
Mm-hmm.
So I lived here a couple years ago with a couple influencer friends of mine at the time. And it was a good experience. I mean, it's a good way to live. It's like a good lifestyle. Granted, it's a little bit hot, but you know, for the tax purposes and the lifestyle that you get, it's probably, you know, one of the best places in the country to move to. Damn,
dude, you just spilled the beans.
Yeah.
That's why I started coming to Florida.
Yeah.
Shit. It's funny. Florida has the most luxury cars registered of any state.
Oh, I believe that. And the thing is, it's a little slow paced here, though. Like, it's like, I think like LA's got like the superficial money where it's just like, you know, trust fund kids, influencers, like a bunch of BS. And then you got Miami where it's like kind of in the middle. Like, you've got a little bit of that, a little bit older money, right? Like, yeah, a little more laid back money. And then you got somewhere like New York where it's like just hustlers and grinders and like super fast paced. It's definitely better than the superficial stuff, don't get me wrong, but it's like you go to New York and you go to some places and you're just like, wow, like this stuff really pushes the needle. You can chill out here a little bit too much, which is the problem.
I take no offense to that, because since moving here, I've had to learn how to drive slower,
yeah, and
talk slower.
Yeah.
Because when I got here, I was like, taka, 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 taka. They're like, whoa, espérate, stop. And mind you, I speak Spanish, and they were telling me to stop. But before we get into like the fun money stuff, one thing that keeps coming up in conversations is when you're sitting in the room with different types of people, there's different types of echelons, the social hierarchy of things, right? You just mentioned that you were in this conversation with basically over $1 billion at the table of net worth.
Yeah.
And one of the things that keeps coming up is, what are the conversations happening at that table?
Once you get to that level of those group of people, like the conversations really become about making more money, right? Like there's really two things. Like, how do we make more money? And depending if you have like a high integrity table, it's like, how do we make an impact and how do we like, you know, do something impactful? But most of the time, 90% of the time when you're at the table with like high net worth individuals, most of the conversation, and granted it depends on who you are, some of it can be about women or like other things like that, or vice versa if you're at a table full of women. But the point of the matter is, it's like 90% of the time it's about how do we make more money. Like, I was at the table and we were talking about business deals and making more money. Mm-hmm. And to sit at those tables, you have to have a unique value prop, right? And so you have to do something very well. You're not going to get to those tables just being a lackey, right? Like, you're going to have to bring your own unique value proposition. And so it's just kind of interesting. But most of the time when you're sitting at those tables, a lot of those conversations are what deals are to be made, what's in your pipeline, what's in my pipeline, where are the synergies, how can we help each other make more money?
Speaking of that, one of the things that I would love to dig into, so right now, I don't need to, reiterate what's going on with all of society and economy, inflation and dollars, etc. But specifically, it seems like those rules don't even seem to exist to you. You seem to look at a thing, a market, a problem, and you said before, I like to catch the trends. For example, when you got into the NFT space, you bought something for what, like a little over 2 million, right?
Yeah.
Why did you buy something for 2 million?
In that situation, like I really, believed in what that was supposed to be. So for context, Pudgy Penguins, which is the project that I purchased 12 months ago, was a top 5 NFT project in the world and kind of kicked off this whole NFT craze. It was like one of the reasons why like NFTs really took off the way they did, and it's kind of responsible for why we're here today. And I always knew when I actually purchased it, when I first purchased it, I made the decision to purchase penguins instead of Bored Apes and CryptoPunks, and at the time it was a good decision because I saw like the brand potential. Now, unfortunately, the project was started by guys who had no operational experience, and at no fault to them, they just couldn't make it work. So when the opportunity came to buy it, I was like, look, I've been building brands for the last 5-6 years. I think there's very few people who can do it better, who understand it the way that I understand it. And so I was like, $2.5 million is a small price to pay. Like for me, Pudgy Penguins is billions or bust. You have Bored Ape with the highest seed round of all time. In 12 months, they raised $450 million at a $4.5 billion valuation. You've never seen anything like that. Like there's never been that type of return that quickly in the history of entrepreneurs and raising money ever. And so you're looking at how these things are valued and how people are looking at them, at least the institutions. And I told myself, I was like, look, I think me personally in my gut, I think there's a better value proposition with Pudgy Penguins if you can, turn the idea and turn it into something tangible. And so I told myself, I was like, look, like $2.5 million is a small price to pay for something that was so magical and so impactful to so many people. And, if it works out the way that I want it to, it'll be $2.5 million to make billions. So it's worth it for me.
I like something you said. You said the how is not the hard part. You love to catch trends. The growth hacker in me can't help but get a little giddy.
Yep.
And you said also that you were basically faced with the decision, do I get into massive chunk loads of debt, or do I find a way to learn from the best? And I'd love to give you the floor on that one, because I'm a huge fan of this exact same person. I have basically behavioral economics is my jam, right? But in your own words, man, who are you listening to? And most importantly, where'd you find them?
Like a lot of people focus on the how, like how am I going to make millions of dollars? And what people need to realize is that the how comes. The how is actually not that difficult. The point of the matter is you have, the how is not that hard. People will look back on their lives and realize that there was many opportunities in their life to become really successful. The thing is, what they lack and where a lot of people fall short is their preparation. Right. And so you and I were talking, and I was basically telling you I came to an inflection point when I was 16. I said, I'm going to continue with school and not make any money for the next 6 years and try to get a business degree and go into debt to get that business degree. Now, to me, that was completely counterintuitive of what it was to be a businessman. A businessman doesn't go into debt to get a business degree. It doesn't make any sense. And so I asked a really successful person that was close to my network at the time, a dad of my friend who is rich. And I basically asked him, I said, look, like, I got to make money. Like, my mom's struggling. Every month she's crying because the bills are due. She's, I take $3 out of her wallet and she's like shedding out in tears. Like, I can't deal with this anymore. But like, what's really the value proposition with going to college? And he said, look, Luca, 1, if you're not going to an Ivy League school, it's pointless. 2, if you do end up going to an Ivy League school, there's 2 things that you're going to get from that experience. 1, the most important being relationships. And 2, there's a lot of value that comes from, people speaking. So a lot of the times, like if you go to Harvard or Stanford or Wharton or any of the top schools, or really any school in general, you'll have like alumni that comes and like speaks. And he says like, look, I went, 6 years in Wharton, and like the best thing that ever happened that like I was most excited for were these like speeches from the alumni talking about their experience and kind of giving you like, a 2-hour mentorship on stage. But he was like, look, Luca, like the relationships you can't really replicate. You have to go to an Ivy League to do that. That's how you get into the, those type of families and those type of like relationships.
And you were not a legacy kid.
And I was not a legacy kid. So I was like, all right, cool. And plus, like, me and rich kids never got along. Like, I didn't have a white friend until I was like in the 8th grade. Like, I was like I was the white kid who hung out with like, 8th grade is when I had my first white friend. And he told me, I was like, look, all of these speeches are on YouTube. There's certain fundamentals, like to be a successful entrepreneur, you need to know. Like, you need to be a decisive like person, right? So like you can train your decisiveness when you go to a restaurant. When I go to a restaurant, I look at the menu for 1 minute. I don't look at the menu for 20 minutes. There's no need to. Like, the food is the food. If I'm going to a restaurant, I know what I want. If I go to a sushi spot, I know what sushi I want. If I go to an Indian spot, I know what I want, right? So like you can train your mind like subconsciously to start making decisions quicker. So decisiveness is 1. 2, if you're going to be a successful businessman or woman, you need to know how to speak well. Like, I have a have a high school. I didn't even graduate high school, but I can speak. I can sit at a table with a bunch of billionaires or a bunch of guys from Ivy League schools, and I can keep up the conversation. Not only keep up the conversation, but I could probably excel the conversation. Why? Right? I have no formal English degree. I could, my grammar is not the best, but the point of the matter is I can hold my own in a conversation. That's so important. You know how many people have been put in front of people and in tables and in rooms with people that could change their life, but because they're so like unsavvy, like, and can't have a thoughtful conversation, like nothing comes from that. Like a lot of my money has been made through relationships. And how do you garner relationships? Well, it's really through your conversation. Like one of the most powerful tools a human in general, or just an entrepreneur has, is their ability to speak and convince. Like you can move countries and move nations. I mean, like you look at somebody like Hitler, who was just like an absolute tyrant and evil person, but because he was able to speak so well, people don't realize this. He was one of the great speakers of our time. Martin Luther King, one of the great speakers of our time, was able to switch a whole racist country and began the process where 30 years later or 50 years later, Obama became president, Yeah. So like the speaking fundamental is so important. People can't go into rooms and have a conversation. So I would read all the time. I would listen to smart people speak, and like all it really takes is listening to podcasts, like listening to podcasts, reading books, and like getting through that thought process, and just being an articulate young or older individual, no matter what it may be. But having the ability to communicate well is really important in all aspects of your life. There's a plethora of different things that you need to be a successful entrepreneur, but the point of the matter is there's probably 5 to 10 fundamental basics that a successful entrepreneur, all of them, have in some regard, right?
What would you say is the pattern in those?
Being an indecisive entrepreneur is tough.
Okay.
Being able to communicate well, being non-biased, right? So a lot of people are arrogant, dude. Like a lot of people are like so hard-headed and like it's my way or the highway. And I knew that like, there was one speech in specifically with a guy named Steve Schwartzman, Stanford class alumni, and this one really resonated with me, but he was basically telling how you have to take a non-biased approach, right? Like, one of my biggest strong suits as an elite marketer, which is really what I am at my core, is the ability to take off my shoes and put on someone else's.
Yeah.
I market the products that I think other people like. Like if I was just pushing stuff that I liked, it'd be a very narrow market, and I have no interest in doing that. I think another one could also be like confident, like believing in yourself. As simple as that, as weird as that sounds, but like there's never been an entrepreneur who didn't believe in himself. And I think like, I've been around a lot of people, grew up with a lot of people who aren't anywhere where they want to be. And I think a common denominator is they just give up, right? Like they just don't believe that they can get there. It's, and then I think probably the last one for my 5 is the ability to overcome stress. Stressful situations break people. The most successful entrepreneurs are able to overcome stress, and stress doesn't affect me anymore. Like I can show you screenshots of me losing millions of dollars in a day off like a stock trade, the most ridiculous things ever. And I'll go to sleep sleeping like a baby that night. Like I am so thick-skinned, there's very few things that can get through me. Maybe it's because of my childhood and how tough it was, or a plethora of different things. But I also knew growing up, like I used to feel so sorry for myself. And then when I was like 15, I was like, dude, like you got to cut this. And ever since like I just like started persevering through the stress, like there's nothing that can crush me. There's no call that can happen. Now I can get stressed, like I can get pissed off, don't get me wrong, but like there's nothing that's going to come into my phone or into my text message that's going to like completely kill my business or kill my motivation. And this is where I think most people fail, is their lack of ability to deal with stress, right? The second things get tough, it's stressful, put it down, go get a job. It's easy. A job is not hard, right? It's not that stressful. You go, show up 9 to 5, lunch break in the middle. Being an entrepreneur, I think the number one thing that you can learn is learning how to deal with stress, because if stress doesn't defeat you, you'll never lose. The second you lose is the second you give up, and the second you give up and the second you lose stems from you being too stressed to keep moving forward, right? And so a lot of people like have really poor stress management and cannot take the beatings. And dude, this game is a bully beatdown, dude. You get beat down every single day, every single week, every single month, every single year in some capacity. And I'll see things that have happened to me that happen to other people, and I just see them destroyed. And I'm just looking at that like, dude, that's happened to me 5 times. Like, why are you like just crying about it? Like, you know what I mean? Like processors will go down, ad accounts will get banned, and they'll just be like, oh my God. And it's like, no, we're problem solvers. At the end of the day, probably the 6th one is just the ability to solve problems.
One common theme that I keep noticing from other people that I've talked to along my years is I noticed a few patterns. One of them, almost all of them have a sports background. Almost all of them have a military background. Almost all of us, and I say us because you're included in this too as well, is we come from childhoods that would normally set us up to fail. But when it comes to your experience, your childhood specifically, I'm pretty sure you kind of came out with a little survivor's guilt.
Yep.
maybe even some bad habits.
Completely.
How'd you break those, man?
Life is a mastery, right? And so I haven't mastered every vertical yet. And there's definitely a lot of things and a lot of trauma I still bring with me. Some of them, my insecurity. For example, downstairs, I have a $500,000 truck parked downside, right? It's the shittiest car I've ever had in my life. Rolls-Royce Cullinan. Completely sucks.
It's like
right?
a G-Wagon, no cup holders.
It's a disaster of a car, right? But why did I buy it? Because I'm still trying to prove to all the people that doubted me when I was younger that I'm getting it, you know?
Chip on your shoulder.
And it's a shitty car. I should have never made that decision. To spend $500,000 on a car, I need $100 million. I don't have $100 million, you know? Like, it was just a fiscally irresponsible, stupid decision that was stemmed from my insecurity, right? This is something I still carry with me. Like, when am I going to get over the fact that I, like, have already, like, gotten to the place in life where I don't need to prove myself or try to rub it in the face of people who've doubted me, right? That's a perfect example of an insecurity I'm still dealing with. So it's an evolution, right? Like, in some things you get over and some things you persevere with. But I think, like, the childhood stuff, you know, I say something like, I used to be so mad at my mom for growing up the way that we did. But today I thank her so much because it's like, I wanted to be rich so bad growing up and all my rich friends are doing nothing. They're lost. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's no fault to them, right? Like, you can't blame somebody for the situation that they're born in. And honestly, dude, like, if I was born rich, I probably would be chilling too. You know, like, seriously, like, why? Like, dad's gonna die, mom's gonna die one day. I'm just gonna have the big house. I'm gonna have everything.
Yeah.
And until then, they'll pay my rent and pay my bills. And, you know, if they're getting 10, 15, 20 grand a month, like, that's money they can spend throughout. You know, it's not like they got to save a little or, you know, budget optimize. And so it's just like, it's an easy life to live and it's easy to coast. So it's like, it's tough. And I've actually been in situations where, like, you know, storks have came by and dropped bags of money and I've gotten lackadaisical. In 2019, I had just become a millionaire. I almost lost it all because I got so comfortable, dude. I was smoking weed every day. I was chilling. I was, like, you know, making 30, 40 grand a day, like, in my sleep, like, profit to me, you know, like, literally doing nothing. And for people who know the story, they know, you know, but, like, I had this influencer monetization pipeline. I had, like, 50 influencers promoting these stores that I all had 50% of. And, like, on a bad day, we do 100 grand in sales across all the stores. You know what I mean? And, like, the profit margins were through the roof. Like, I was just caking money, but I was like, and then I almost lost it all. I doubled down. I thought I was the hot shit, and I literally just got bulldozed until I was down to my last 200 G's.
So that ego almost fucked up your bag.
The ego will crush you. Like, I used to think about it, like, how do people almost lose it all after they make it? You'll be surprised, dude. It's not that hard.
It's not harder. It's
not that hard.
It's easier to lose
It's actually pretty easy to lose it. It's not about how much money you have. It's how much cash you're making on the monthly basis. Cash flow is everything. Fuck how much money you've got saved up. That thing can go in a second.
I'm glad you brought that up. And you also brought up the insecurity part. In my experience, when I was working, I was going back and forth to LA for about 2-3 years, and I kept meeting these influencers, and they were like hot shit.
Yeah.
And then they lived like with the mattress on the floor.
Yeah.
Or like I was giving them a ride, which was weird because like I was like whatever. But you saw that and said, oh shit, dude, you got 1 million followers. I feel like you should have $1 million.
Yep.
Why don't we do something together? So back to the how, just kind of appearing, right? You saw them. Who's someone that you saw a positive transformation once they worked with you?
Yeah, so Supreme Patty was probably the one I'm most well known for. So at the time, Supreme Patty was like the Nelk before Nelk and the Danny Duncan before Danny Duncan. That store did tens of millions of dollars, and it was a 70% profit margin business. He went from basically broke to millionaire in a couple months. And everybody was like, dude, how are you making all this money? He was like, yo, Luca's the money man. And we had a deal where he would bring me like influencers, and I'd give him 10 to 15% on the store, depending on who it was. And he would just cake back. So he was like my affiliate. And it kind of stems back to the one thing, like, you guys got to understand, like, reason why I was able to be so successful, and it all stems from this, is I made a lot of people a lot of money. I was the guy that if you came and you did a deal with me, like, I was going to make you more money. At this point, I look back at my life and I'm like, how did I make all of the money? Like 10% of the money I made was based on my IQ, right? My intelligence. The other 90% was based on my EQ, my emotional quotient, right? Like how I interacted with people in my relationships.
Yeah.
Like all of my money now stems from relationships. I've had $1 million locked up in processing, and I owed an influencer 400 G's. Like, dude, our money's locked up. I shouldn't have to pay you. I take that money out of my account, pay them, and I'll fucking foot the 180-day fucking wait for the $1 million to unlock. One of the reasons why I'm on this podcast with you today is like, dude, like one person will listen to this and be like completely impacted. That's where my relationships stem from. Like, dude, if you're a hustler, like you don't need to be smart. That's what growing up like with like in the hood and like being a part of like, you know, these crews and like these like, you know what I mean? Like I'm seeing, like I saw the hustle really early on. Like, yo, like I saw people really like flip bags and like move packs. And I'm like, oh, like being a hustler and being a go-getter and like that confidence and that EQ is everything. Like people always focus on the IQ. Like, dude, I know dumbos who are worth tens, literally dumbos.
I almost feel like to some people it's an advantage to be a little dumb because they don't really gauge like I might fuck this up or the ego doesn't get
For
in
sure,
the way.
the IQ can overcomplicate things too. You know what I mean? Like you start doing risk reward and you start mapping things out.
Analysis paralysis.
And then again, it depends. We're talking about entrepreneurs here. If you're a stock trader, like all these things are completely different businesses, right? But like entrepreneurs, like dude, it's an EQ business, dude. It's the guy that I was actually sitting at the table with. He was like, Richard Branson was my mentor, and he said Richard Branson is good at three things: raising money, building teams, and instilling confidence. He was like, he sucks at everything else. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And I kind of feel like the same way about me. I have like 4 or 5 really good skill sets. I'm pretty deficient everywhere else. I have my strong suits. You just got to lean in what you're strong at and like really nurture those traits.
When it comes to the Walmart deal, how'd you put it that?
From the packaging to like the branding, the positioning, the marketing, like granted, like that's me. But like, dude, Steve, who runs the whole, is the chief revenue officer of Gel Blaster, like, dude, he's the guy. Like, has nothing to do with me. He's a beast. I was just like, dude, here's famous influencers. Here's millions of views. Here's like great ads with tens of millions of views. Here's, you know, here's fire branding, fire packaging, fire positioning, fire website. And it just makes it easy, you know?
Why are so many influencers, I'm going like this because they're doing great with numbers, but they're not doing good on the conversion? Why is it that you're able to bring them something, everyone makes money, but what they're doing is not making them money? Because I know more broke influencers than anything else.
It's just product market fit. Certain influencers cannot monetize off certain products. Like it's very like you have to hit the perfect product.
Yeah.
Dude, like the problem right now with influencers is they need to be focused on building the content. Like once an influencer diverts its focus out of the content and starts building a business, things start to fail. But very few people are coming to them saying, hey, let's go build a business. And I just think there's like a unique opportunity right now because content is getting so competitive. The second that you lose a little bit of that touch, it's like you're donezo, you know? And the thing is, to be a successful content influencer in any capacity, whether you're an entrepreneur, influencer, or, you know, a Jake or Logan Paul or a Danny Duncan, it all stems from one thing. And I learned this from Jake, actually. I was like, why do you think you made it and everybody else didn't? Quality, consistent content. Consistency being the most important word. Jake Paul blew up because he did a vlog every day. Daily vlogs. Same with Logan. That's how they blew up. So the good content is easy. Everybody can come up with good content. You know, it's the consistent part that everybody fails at.
Speaking of that, one, product market fit, and two, the retention and attention. If you were to dumb it down, like I'm 5 years old and I'm an influencer with like, I don't know, 500,000 followers, where do I start?
My thing is it's hard for me to answer that question because everyone asks me that same question, right? Like, how do you do the product research for something like this? Yeah. I have like a gut feeling, dude. Like, I just see somebody, I'm like, that works.
So in the business world, just like you focus on the personal, you can see someone like Andrew Tate, maybe agree with like half of what he says. The other half, you're like, dude, shut the fuck up.
Right.
But you're still able to dissect something out of that.
Yeah.
That right there, how did you get there?
Everybody has different perspectives. And like people are not born with their opinions. Their external factors dictate their opinions.
Nature
you
versus
put a bunch
nurture.
of Asian and black and white and Hispanic kids on an island, they're all going to come out the same. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing internally programmed there that's going to show them. So when I see Andrew Tate like objectifying women and I'm like, dude, something's happened there. Like there's something deeper there, like that's like just you don't want to talk about that like stems for like this and it might not even be that. It might be the fact that you just grew up in Europe. People don't realize. Like, dude, the Europeans and like that side of the world is totally not where this side of the world is. I grew up in LA, right? With a single mom, poor as hell. Like all the classrooms, like there was like 9 different races in my classrooms. Like that's what I grew up with. That's common to me. I look at a black person like I look at a white person. There's no difference to me, you know? Like so that was my environment. He might have grown up in some, you know, in UK in some like, you know, skinhead town, you know what I mean? Like who knows, you know, like I don't know. And so he's a product of his environment. So I don't look at that and be like, that's a fucked up person. You know what I mean? Though I think some of the things I completely disagree with, and I don't think people should be looking at people like that as like role models and mentors, I'm still not going to fault him for it because he doesn't know any better. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, like he doesn't have the same experience that I do. I saw my mom get used like an object by my men while we were growing up, like treated like a piece of shit. Like that's not going to fly with me. I'm not going to do that, you know? But so he might not have that same experience. And so at the end of the day, like a lot of it is just people not knowing any better. Like when you look at a guy who's a racist, at the end of the day, like he's not a racist because he was born and came out the womb a racist. He came out racist because his family before him was a racist, because the people in his community were racists. That's how he became a racist, you know? And so it's like at some point, like I don't take people, like I empathize, you know? And like I extrapolate the knowledge that I think is applicable to me, and everybody has different preferences and different narratives, but I'm never going to hold somebody or, you know, persecute them for having a certain perspective. Because at the end of the day, like if it's so left field, something happened like throughout your years in your environment that led you to be the way that you are.
You're one of the only people that said, I might not agree with everything the guy says, but I'm picking up something along the way. So you're learning something from every single person that you're meeting, hearing. You're essentially creating your mentors.
It's the evolution of man, right? Like there's podcasts of me where you'll see me 3 years ago to where I am 2 years ago to 1 year ago to today. Like it's a constant evolution. Like if I ever come on a podcast, I'm the same person I was on the first podcast. Like there's something wrong there. Like I'm constantly evolving, dude. Like if not, like stagnation is regression. You know what I mean? Like staying the same is just as bad as fucking taking two steps backwards. Like the one thing I pride myself on though, there's nothing you can't convince me otherwise. Like I could be so dead set on opinion, but if you lay out the facts to me in a clear and concise way, like I can be swayed. Like there's no opinion of mine that I'm stuck to. Dude, the one thing I hate the most is a hard-headed individual. Like somebody like, and I grew up with that. My brother's pretty hard-headed. Like I could show my brother a Google screenshot and be like, no, this is the fact. He'd be like, no. And like, I hate that, dude.
Yeah.
That is like one of the biggest faults that most people have. It's like, nah, it's my way or the highway. Nah, I'm right. Andrew Tate's misogynistic point of view about women. Yeah, that's right. I agree with that. At the end of the day, like we're human. It's about equality. It's not about one being better than the other. And sure, there might be, you know, thousands of years of precedent, but that doesn't matter. Like we're in a new era, a new generation. We're sending rockets to Mars. Like, dude, you know what I mean? We weren't doing that 5,000 years ago or 2,000 years or even 100 years ago. There's so much information out there that it's like, dude, how can you be the same man that you were 5 years ago? It's like impossible. What are you doing? Even like Andrew Tate, you'll be like, okay, yo, what color is my Bugatti or whatever? Like, that's funny. You know what I mean? But
Is
like,
that his accent?
But dude, in the grand scheme of things, like he's not that much of a boss. Like I know real bosses, dude. Like making 30, 40, 50 million dollars a year, that's great and that's like amazing for some people, but like, dude, he'll never make it to like multi-billionaire. Like, dude, no, dude. Like those guys look at that shit and like, dude, what are you saying? Like they can't align their brands with people like that. Like if Andrew Tate ever wanted to raise money, it would never happen. He would never raise money. He would never. No venture capitalist will give that guy money. Me personally, like I want to be one of the great entrepreneurs of my time. Right? Like that's my goal. Like I want to be a billionaire. I want the guy who has billions of dollars and can do anything that I want. I can help. If there's an animal I want to save from extinction, I can save it. You know, like I want to have the ultimate power to do all these amazing things. Imagine if I was racist or misogynistic, like good luck. It's never going to happen. So it's just like one of those things where it's like, okay, he's got his thing. And at the end of the day, he makes plenty of money and that might be enough money for him. And that's fantastic. But like, for me, it's more about money. It's about like legacy. Like at the end of the day, humans will evolve to like, we're all going to look at each other like equal playing, like on an equal level at some point. Like we're already there. Look about how much we went from basically 50 years ago, segregation, you know, sexism everywhere, to like where we are today, to like where we will be 50 years from now. 50 years from now, people will look at the Andrew Tate stuff and be like, yeah, like the final people of that era will be dying. Like there's maybe 100 more years of that before it's like, no, dude, we're all human. We all bleed red. You pull my skin off of my face and we all have the same anatomy. People think their sphere of influence is just their friends, right? There's the common analogy. If I'm around 5 millionaires, I'll be the 6th. If I'm around 5 losers, I'll be the 6th. But the sphere of influence is actually a lot more interesting. It goes down to the music you listen to. For example, if I'm listening to rap music versus if I'm listening to classical music or rock music, my attitude and mood is in two completely different things.
The lyrics
right?
alone.
You'll think about it. And like, you'll think it like, am I going to go, like, you think about like, gang banging and like no, it's true though. It's like, are gangbangers when they're about to shoot up somebody's house, what music are they riding to? Are they riding the classical music, Beethoven?
Imagine Mozart.
No, they're not though. They're riding the NBA Youngboy. I'm gonna pop him in his mouth. Hey, you know what I mean? Like that. But there you go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Imagine if that wasn't around. If they were riding the classical music, I bet you shootings would drop 80%. because like because it triggers a different thought process. That's their sphere of influence. The food you eat, right? If I'm eating McDonald's every day, you know what I mean, bullshit food, then I'm gonna have less thinking power. Like my highest productivity is when I'm fasting. When I don't eat, like that's when I'm on my Super Saiyan mode. Like no one can outwork me when I'm not eating. The content that you consume, right? Like if I'm consuming a bunch of content, that's why like who I follow on social medias are so important.
Yeah.
Like sometimes like the content you consume is like everything, dude. If you're on TikTok all day, you know what I mean, consuming like, you know, hot girl content, like dude, you're gonna be a sex addict. You know what I mean? If you're a young man. You know what I mean? And all you're seeing on your feed all day is hot women. Like you're gonna subsequently, that's all you're gonna think about. That's your sphere of influence, your consumption, and it consists of a multitude of different verticals, some of which I just included. How you consume things is so important, and your sphere of influence includes that consumption. That dictates who you are as a human. And like, dude, I have a bunch of things that when I listen to hip hop music, what I'm thinking is completely different if I'm listening to classic rock. It's a completely different Luca. Maybe that might be the Gemini in me. Who knows? But that's just my experience. But I know it's not just me, because I ask people and you'll relate to it. Like it's a completely different ride.
It is.
And so it's just like, it's interesting because I think that's like the most easiest analogy to understand, to like really understand what I'm saying. Just play some music in the car and record your thoughts in your mind. Drive for the next week and each day play a different genre of music and think about the thoughts that you're thinking about. It's insane. It's insane how much your mind will shift just based on the music you're listening to, which leans back to why your sphere of influence and what you consume is so important. If you're consuming a bunch of bullshit all day, right, from the food, from the content, from the music, from the people you hang around, from your spouse, right? A spouse can be a huge killer. Your significant other can completely ruin you, you know? Like, eventually, like, you will be a product of those habits and a product of your environment. You know, and what, you know, friends is a huge one. When I was 16, I was hanging around a bunch of rich kids, right? I just started making white friends and I was like, oh, this is great. Like, you guys are rich, Beverly Hills, like life is good. Went to Nobu for the first time. And like, I'm like, I can get used to this, staying at their nice houses with central air. I realized I started acting like a rich kid. And I was like, wait, these kids can act like this. They can go do drugs and go party and go, you know, hang out with girls. They can do that all day because their life is made. Their parents have their backdrop. And then I was like, oh, for a whole year, I got kind of like brainwashed into thinking I was like this rich kid until I stole money out of my mom's wallet. And I was like, oh, she's crying because I stole $8 out of her wallet for weed.
Damn.
I'm clearly not a rich kid because my rich friend wanted to go smoke some weed and he wanted me to piece up on it. So I had to go steal money from her. I saw her crying. I was like, oh, his mom isn't crying.
No.
Now his mom is giving him 100 without even blinking. And so I was like, okay, I completely cut off all my friends. I was like, bro, I'd rather be by myself. A lot of people are like, well, what if I don't have like successful friends? Or, you know, what if my sphere of influence, don't hang out with anyone. I removed all of my, you know, gangster friends, skateboarding friends, rich kid. I removed all of that because I didn't want any of that. And I wasn't any of that. You know, I'd rather be alone than be around bullshit. You know, I'd rather be all by myself. Finding pleasure in being alone is important. A lot of people can't do that. Like, dude, Boom. A lot of people are very, like, cannot not socialize and integrate, and that's a fatal flaw,
It's like the elevator. They can't get in there without being on their phone.
It's
like
crazy.
They get awkward. And at the end of the day, I understand because you kind of have, like, that insecurity or whatever the hell you got going on. Being comfortable with being alone, I mean, personally, I'm a little biased here. I love that shit. I need it at very least once a week. I know, dude, I piss off a lot of people with that. I need it. Right?
I need it more than once a week, dude. I'm like, I thrive being, unfortunately, it's because of, I became a product of my environment.
Yeah.
And when I was young, like, that's how I became successful. So I attribute being alone to being successful. Like, that. So it is a flaw. It can be a catch-22, but dude, I love being alone. I hate being with people. I'm an introvert as much as people don't like to realize it. I hate public speaking. I hate the whole nine, but I'm good at it. And I impact people with it. So that's why I do it.
So you push through it.
I push through it. I don't know. I just get over it, you know?
I used to have the bad habit of reading people and then saying it out loud.
Yeah.
And my family had to be like, yo, chill. You can't do that. So as we're wrapping up, I definitely would love to go over a few things, specifically the summarized bullet points so that you can take something with you from this conversation. Let's go through it a little bit. So the first thing that we went through in this conversation is that the how is not the hard part. And I love that because a lot of the times when we speak to anybody that's doing well for themselves, there's this emphasis on how did you make it? How did you start? Blah, 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 which is fine. But when the goal is just getting you excited, you ever had like, I don't know, good news or something you're looking forward to? Maybe it's going out with your friends, maybe it's a new job, etc. Like, it's like that Will Ferrell sound clip. It gets the people going. That right there is what it looks like when your goal is worth it. right? So one of the things that Luca has identified is that if the goal is great enough, amazing, I get the people going, we're going to come together towards a common goal. And then after that, he immediately focuses on what can Luca do for you? Almost like a customer service approach. What can Luca do for you? And then from there, the immediate thing that he goes to, okay, now I'm with you, now you're with me. Now what can we do for them? And then the profit starts to come in. And it almost sounds a little bit too simplified when we go through it. But the thing is that at the end of the day, the reason that no one tends to stick through it is because it looks simple. And it can be insulting to people's egos when it is that simple. Another point that we got into very, very quickly, which was making your mentors. So Luca, like myself, were dropouts at different stages of education, but the same thing was present. We looked at people that were doing it better than us, those that were successful before us, and we just focused on what can I learn from that person. It doesn't matter whether you agree with them or not. Another point that he got really hardcore into that I loved, which was psychology is way more important than we give it credit for. I understand that some people out there might not see the value in it, but first principles thinking, beginner's mind. First principles thinking, beginner's mind. I'm gonna say it one more time. First principles thinking, beginner's mind. Hone it, Google it, try it out, okay? And another point that he got into that essentially is the reason he's doing what he's doing at the level that he's doing is that an introvert is able to sit down with people and have a conversation. An introvert is able to come on a podcast and have a lengthy conversation. An introvert is able to set up on a stage. An introvert is able to bring a team together. Are you kind of seeing where I'm going with this? An introvert was able to step outside of his box and focus more on what is this action going to get me? How to do with that summary? Are we kind of close?
Great. That was a phenomenal summary. We'll wrap this up.
My man. Thanks for coming up, man.
Thanks for having me on.
So as we wrap things up, I wanted to not only say thank you, but also give you a heads up. We now have a Discord channel specifically called Growth Society. The link is in the caption below this video. There we share resources. Hell, we even collab on a monthly basis with small business owners that are interested in scaling their operations, being acquiring other people in their markets, consolidating, refining the way that they handle people, product, and process. This has been Growth Society. I have been Catriel C. Sarfati, your host. Thanks so much for tuning in. See you next time.